Imagine a courtroom in absolute silence. Attentive lawyers, tense witnesses, the judge with a serious face. A black boy, just 14 years old, enters in handcuffs, accused of a crime that could destroy his life forever. But, in the middle of the hearing, something unexpected happens. He slowly raises his eyes, stares firmly at the judge, and shoots a sentence that time stopped inside that court. "You are my father." The reaction? A mix of shock, silence, disbelief, and a truth that no one would ever imagine hearing in that place. What had been hidden for so many years came to light, and what seemed like just another common trial turned into a battle of identity, justice, and redemption. Watch until the end, because what this boy revealed changed everything. It was a cloudy Tuesday morning in a big city marked by contrasts. Modern buildings shared space with old, worn-out buildings. The sound of cars, horns, and hurried footsteps made up the typical soundtrack of urban routine. But that morning, a specific building caught attention: the State Court of Justice. Inside, everything was ready for another hearing that, until then, seemed like just another process among the thousands that take place every day. The air was heavy, the walls cold and neutral, the atmosphere silent and tense, as always before a trial begins. Sitting on a wooden chair in the left corner of the room was KK, a 14-year-old black boy, slight, hands handcuffed and looking down. He wore a borrowed dress shirt, 2 sizes too big for his body. The shoes were worn out and the socks were different from each other. But nothing caught more attention than his eyes. There was something about them. It wasn't fear. It wasn't revolt. It was something much deeper. It was pain, mixed with firmness. Suffering mixed with purpose. Beside him, his public defender hurriedly leafed through documents. On the other side, the prosecutor in the case was preparing to argue forcefully, as if that boy were a dangerous criminal. The accusation was serious: attempted robbery and resisting arrest. But the real story behind those papers was still unknown to everyone there. Behind KK, in the audience, only one woman was present: Donna Lourdes, the lady who took care of him since he was little, in a temporary home on the outskirts. She knew his pain. "I knew about your silence." She saw him grow up asking every day, "Who is my father?" To answer, "I never saw." The mother never revealed it. It disappeared before he turned 4. Kaike grew up among shelters, temporary families, and looks that judged him before even hearing his story. He was always the problem, the difficult boy, the aimless child. But no one there knew about his sharp intelligence, his photographic memory, and the letter he kept in the pocket of his heart. An old letter, yellowish, which said, "To Judge Marcos Almeida, your documents are ready." Attached, birth certificate of the minor, Kaike Silva. It was just a clue, a fragment of paper he found inside an old Bible in the shelter where he lived for a while. But for KK, that was the truth. He wasn't just there to defend himself. He was there to reveal a secret hidden for more than a decade. As Judge Marcos entered the room with his impeccable robe, his rigid posture, and his reputation for sternness, he had no idea what awaited him. There he was, about to judge yet another case. But this wouldn't be just another one. Since he was little, KK did not have access to common privileges. While other children received toys for Christmas, he received empty promises. While others ate heartily, he counted coins to buy a loaf of bread at the corner store. His reality was marked by hunger, abandonment, and prejudice. School was his only refuge. There he stood out. He read faster than his colleagues and wrote clearly. He liked stories, especially those that talked about justice. But the world seemed to be constantly against him. At age 11, he was wrongly accused of robbery. There was no evidence, but because he was black, poor, and alone, he was booked. From then on, his trajectory was marked. But even in the face of all this, he never gave up on knowing who his father was. One day, going through the boxes at the shelter, he found an old folder with his name on it. Inside, in addition to the incomplete birth certificate, was that enigmatic letter with the name Marcos Almeida. When researching, he discovered that this name belonged to a judge from the Children and Youth Court. Coincidence? Perhaps. But his instinct said otherwise. In the following months, he started going to the forum, sat outside. He watched the movements. He memorized the names of the employees. I heard conversations, and when he finally saw Judge Marcos's face, something inside him said, "It's him." The attempted robbery for which he was accused was actually a mess. He was trying to return a cell phone forgotten at a bakery counter, but the owner, upon seeing him holding the device, shouted "Thief!" and called the police. Keiki tried to explain, tried to run. He tried to resist the security guard's push, but it was in vain. He was handcuffed, taken, and booked again. And that was how, by the irony of fate, the trial was scheduled that would bring him face to face with the man he believed himself to be, your father. As the judge read the court documents, KK watched him silently. Every feature on that man's face seemed familiar. The way he held the pen, the way he frowned. It was as if he was looking into a mirror of the future. But no one there knew that. Not yet. The clock showed 10:37 a.m. when Judge Marcos Almeida looked up from the documents and looked at the defendant before him. Keiki Silva, 14 years old, accused of attempted theft. "Mr. Defender, you can begin your speech." The public defender stood up, adjusted his glasses, and began reading the defense argument. The words sounded technical, formal, almost soulless. But the boy sitting there didn't pay attention to any comma. He was fixated on the man who seemed so familiar. His hands were shaking slightly, but his mind was on fire. "I need to say it. It's now or never. I can't leave here without telling the truth." While the adults talked, discussed laws, blamed and justified, Keiki focused on breathing. He remembered Donna Lourdes' words that morning. "You have too much courage inside that heart. Go with the truth, my son. Only the truth sets you free." It was then that, for the first time, the judge questioned him directly. "Keiki, do you want to say something before I make my decision?" The room fell silent. The boy took a deep breath. He raised his head. He looked straight into the judge's eyes. The tension was almost palpable. The defender tried to interrupt, but Keiki had already made the decision. And then he said, You are my father." The silence was total. For 3 seconds, which seemed like an eternity, no one knew how to react. The judge remained static. The prosecutor frowned, not understanding. The public defender turned around, perplexed. Mrs. Lourdes covered her mouth in shock. "How it is?" stammered the judge, removing his glasses. "You are my father. I have proof. And I'm not leaving here without saying that." The murmur started low, coming from the audience. A court officer approached the judge, trying to understand whether they should interrupt the session. The judge asked for silence with a slow gesture. Keiki, with his hands still cuffed, pulled a paper from his shirt pocket. It was a copy of the letter. That old letter signed Marcos Almeida. "My mother left me this letter. She said I was the result of an affair with a judge. You never told me your name. Just left it. I looked, I researched, I compared dates. I know you knew me." The judge turned white as a sheet. His hands were shaking slightly. He recognized the role. He remembered that woman. He remembered the night. He remembered that she never showed up again. There, in front of everyone, the judge was in shock. A boy, with his soul torn apart, had just exposed a possible truth that could destroy his career, his reputation, and at the same time, explain everything he never understood about his own life. He tried to maintain his composure. "This is court, boy. This is no place for this type of accusation without concrete evidence." But Keiki was not intimidated. "You judge children every day. But have you ever wondered if any of them could be yours? I am the boy that life hid from you, but today, I decided to reveal myself." The defense asked for an immediate pause. The judge, still in shock, accepted. The hearing was suspended for 24 hours, but the bomb had already exploded. At the exit, reporters gathered. Someone had recorded the moment. The internet began to buzz. The video of a black boy accusing the judge of being his father went viral within hours. The city was in shock. The court made headlines. And behind the scenes, Judge Marcos was facing the biggest conflict of his life. In the cell that night, KK didn't sleep. He knew the truth needed more than words, but he also knew that this moment was the beginning of something bigger. The city was in shock. The court made headlines. And behind the scenes, Judge Marcos was facing the biggest conflict of his life. The next morning, the public defender, now engaged, decided to investigate. They went after old records, forum documents, photos of the judge's youth, and a medical record that confirmed KK's mother had been treated at a hospital in the same month that Marcos was involved in a social project 15 years ago on the outskirts. The connection was emerging. The judge, in his home alone, searched the past for answers. The memory of a woman with sweet eyes who said, "I don't want anything from you. I just want to raise my son in peace." He ignored it at the time. He thought it was just another story. But now, his son was before him. And more. It was in the dock. The unfairness of life took its toll. How to judge your own blood. How to maintain posture when your heart collapses inside. This was the beginning of the real storm. And from here on, the story would no longer be just about a poorly explained crime, to turn into a struggle between past and present, between truth and reputation, between justice and emotion. The day after the court incident, the name KK Silva, it was on the city's main news portals. The video in which he accuses Judge Marcos Almeida of being his father had surpassed 500,000 views on social media. Black boy challenges the system in the middle of the courtroom. "You're my father," says teenager to judge. Case moves the country. The headlines were all dramatic, and the audience was divided. On the one hand, those who said that everything was just an act. On the other, those who were moved by the courage of a boy with nothing to lose, fighting for his origin, his dignity, his identity. Judge Marcos, isolated, refused to make statements. But inside, I was devastated. What if it's true? What if I really abandoned a child without knowing it? What if I denied him the justice I defend? Meanwhile, the public defender, who previously treated the case as just another case, began to see KK with different eyes. Now he saw a wronged, courageous boy with a story that could change the understanding of the entire juvenile justice system. They started a silent task force. First, they sought more details about KK's mother, Natalia Silva. She had been an outsourced employee in the Forum building itself 15 years earlier. Cleaner, young, discreet, disappeared for over a decade. A timesheet with his name was found, dated the same month that Judge Marcos worked on a social campaign to bring judges and employees closer together. And most importantly, a behind-the-scenes photo of the campaign. In the image, Natalia, alongside other employees, and right behind her, smiling discreetly, young Marcos Almeida. It was the first visual link between the two. Faced with public commotion, the prosecutor's office, trying to stifle the crisis, offered a deal. KK would be released without a criminal record if he withdrew his speech against the judge, but he refused. It's not just about being free, it's about being recognized. I want to know who I am. The defense then filed a request for a mandatory DNA test. Judge Marcos officially could refuse him, and he did. I will not give in to media pressure. This is a hoax. The rejection fell like a bomb. The population revolted. Commentators, jurists, and activists began to question. Why would someone innocent refuse a test that could prove the truth? And the judge's silence began to weigh like guilt. The defense then filed a request for a mandatory DNA test. Judge Marcos officially could refuse him. With pressure mounting, a new witness emerged. Her name was Ana Lucia, Natalia's former co-worker. She went to the forum and asked to speak to KK's defender. She was carrying a small wooden box with her, with some belongings that Natalia had left with her before disappearing. Inside the box, a children's chain with the letter K. A handwritten note saying, "If one day I disappear, tell him that his father was a fair man." And finally, an old prenatal exam, which indicated the person responsible for monitoring, Dr. Raul Vicente, Marcos's family's personal obstetrician. It was the missing piece. Now it was no longer a question of faith. There was evidence. There were testimonies. There was connection. A children's chain with the letter K. The judge, alone at home, was rummaging through drawers, old photos, youth notebooks, campaign tickets. He finds a folded note between the pages of a law book. "You will never accept me. That's why I'm leaving. But one day, our son will find you." It was hers, from Natalia. He sat down, and for the first time in years, cried. With the new evidence, a group of progressive lawyers demanded the reopening of the case with a focus on judicial review and recognition of paternity. Kaike was called to testify again, but this time not as a defendant. Now he was witness to your own truth. The judge requested temporary removal from office. The hearing was scheduled for 7 days from now, and this time the whole country would be watching. In the days following Judge Marcos Almeida's removal, the city became a minefield of debates. On television programs, radios, and podcasts, the question was the same. What if it's true? What if that boy really is the judge's son? While some defended the magistrate's innocence, others saw something much deeper, the portrait of a system that prefers to hide flaws rather than admit them. KK, previously invisible, was now a symbol of an abandoned generation. It became a headline, a topic for writing in schools, inspiration for graffiti on walls. His story was no longer just about fatherhood. It was about recognition, justice, and courage. But with fame also came weight. Kaike began to be followed by photographers. His every step was news. Reporters surrounded the public defender's office looking for statements. And even with growing support from public opinion, he felt increasingly alone. One night, he confided to Dona Lourdes, "Auntie, everyone talks about me now, but no one asks me if I'm okay." She hugged him in silence. It was the hug of someone who knows that fame does not replace affection, that recognition does not cure abandonment. On the other side of the city, Judge Marcos Almeida was isolated in his home, trying to reconcile the public figure and the injured man. In the mirror, he saw a familiar face, but now he couldn't look into his own eyes. On his desk, a folder with all the case documents, a letter from Mother, a photo of Kaike, and the DNA test, now ready, just waiting for your signature to be authorized. But he hesitated. "If I sign, and it's true, everything I've built will fall apart. But if I don't sign, maybe I'm denying the only chance to make amends for what I've done." He didn't sleep, and every night I read the note left by Natalia. "Our son will find you." The public defender located the Dr. Raul Vicente, the doctor who took care of Natalia's pregnancy. At first, he was reluctant. He was afraid of getting involved in a scandal. But, faced with insistence and the human appeal of the case, he gave in. He revealed that, in fact, he had attended to Natalia on the recommendation of a judge friend, but refused to name names. Natalia's medical record mentioned the building where Marcos lived at the time as the emergency address. It was another piece fitting into the puzzle. Meanwhile, KK received permission to visit Natalia's old house, which had been closed for years. There, with the help of Dona Lourdes, he searched boxes, furniture covered in sheets and abandoned cabinets. It was in the basement that they found a locked wooden chest. Inside it, Natalia's diaries, a diary with pregnancy notes, and between the pages of a notebook, an envelope with the inscription, "For Marcos, if he ever wants to know." The envelope contained a direct handwritten message. "If you're reading this, it's because our son found you. I don't charge you anything, but he deserves to know who he is. Even if you don't feel ready, don't deny him what the world has already tried to take away, a name, an origin." That same week, a legal team delivered the envelope to the judge, they lion, and he cried for the second time. The next morning he went to the laboratory, submitted the signed form, authorized the DNA test, but he asked for absolute secrecy. "I wanted to know the truth, before the world knew." 3 days later, the envelope from the laboratory arrived, sealed, formal, irrefutable. He opened it himself. There it was. Result: 99.97% genetic compatibility. Marcos Almeida is Kike Silva's biological father. The judge collapsed. That same afternoon, he wrote a letter. He handed it over to the president of the court. In it, he confessed his omission, his abandonment, his denial. Not in a legal way, but in a human way. He assumed he ignored signs, who preferred to remain silent rather than investigate. That now, too late, I wanted to recognize. Requested your voluntary dismissal of the position, and asked to speak to KK in person. The next hearing would be symbolic. The judge would no longer judge the case. Now, it would be part of him. KK agreed to meet with him. The city, the country, and the entire internet were waiting for this moment. It was the beginning of the end, and the beginning of revealed truth. The day has come. The courtroom was completely packed, but it was no ordinary trial. The hearing had been reclassified as symbolic reconciliation session, with monitoring by the Public Ministry, Ombudsman's Office, OAB, press, and human rights groups. TV cameras positioned, flashes, tense silence. In the center of the court, Kike Silva, now with a different posture, firm, but with teary eyes. Facing him, no longer a judge, but an ordinary man. Marcos Almeida, visibly haggard, with his shoulders hunched by the weight of years of silence. Donna Lourdes was there, the public defender, next to KK. The country, watching live. When everyone sat down, Marcos asked to speak. He stood up with difficulty, took a deep breath, and faced KK directly. His voice was hoarse, shaky, but sincere. "Throughout my life I sought to apply justice, but I ignored the greatest of all the injustices I committed, denying the existence of someone who came from me." The court remained completely silent. "You came to me not for money, not for revenge, but for truth. And it took me a while to understand that." He then took an envelope out of his pocket. It was the official result of the DNA test. "I am your father, Kike, and I cannot change the past, but I am here, in front of everyone, to publicly admit it." A whisper ran through the hall. People were crying. Some applauded in silence. "You came to me not for money, not for revenge, but for truth, and it took me a while to understand that." Kike took a deep breath. He stared at Marcos. For a moment, he thought about everything he had been through. The orphanages, the hunger, the looks of contempt, the sleepless nights wanting to know who his father was. And now he was there, before him. But there was no hug. Not yet. The wound was too deep to be healed with a symbolic gesture. "I don't hate you, but I also don't know if I can love you. I just needed to know who I was. Thank you for giving me that." And then, for the first time, KK cried. Not out of sadness, but for relief, because it was View. The public defender's office filed a formal request to include paternity in KK's civil registry. The public ministry complied, and the name KK Almeida Silva officially came into existence. He chose to keep his mother's Silva in honor of the woman who fought alone for him. The video of the reunion went viral. There were millions of views in 24 hours. Public figures, artists, former judges, and lawyers spoke out. But the most impactful came from Marcos himself. He published a video on his former Legal Talks channel where he said, "Today I stop being a judge, but I start to be a father, even if late, even if imperfect." Days later, Dona Lourdes gave KK one last gift: your mother's complete diary. Page by page, he discovered a passionate, honest woman who had truly loved Marcos, but who was left behind when she became pregnant. He was afraid. But he wasn't a bad man. He was just too weak to be strong for two. Natalia's words served as a balm. And the last page contained something that KK never expected. "If one day he recognizes you, forgive him. Because love, my son, is stronger than abandonment." Cake then made a decision. He went to the public defender and said, "I want to study law. I want to understand this system. I want to help others like me." He received a full scholarship. He began attending a preparatory course, and with the help of a friend from the public defender's office, he created a social media channel called Children of Truth, where he told stories of young people in a situation of abandonment, searching for their origins. The channel grew quickly, and KK went from defendant to reference. After some time, Marcos and KK began to meet discreetly. Walks in the park, short lunches, nothing forced. It was like rebuilding a bridge with old wood. It required care, patience, and a willingness to make mistakes and start over. Marcos had left the bench, but now worked on social projects, trying to inspire other judges to look at cases with humanity. And he always said in his lectures, "If one day you deny the truth out of fear, remember that fear destroys much more than error." KK broke a cycle, the cycle of silence, the cycle of abandonment, the cycle of not knowing. He didn't just find out who he was, he chose who I wanted to be, and that no one could ever take it away from him. Time passed. Cake continued his law course. He was already known as the boy who faced his own father in court and changed his own history. Your channel, Children of Truth, grew day by day, bringing reports from young people who, like him, sought emotional justice, not just legal. On the other side, Marcos was beginning to recover. He kept a low profile, away from the media, but involved in social initiatives that supported young orphans and single mothers. It was as if he was silently trying to make amends for what he had failed to do for Natalia. The relationship between father and son, although still distant, was stable. But destiny hadn't revealed all its cards yet. One afternoon, KK received mail with no return address. Inside the envelope, there was only a yellowed sheet with letters typed on a typewriter. You think you've got it all figured out. But your mother's story wasn't just about abandonment. It was about silencing. She knew too much, and someone made sure to silence that voice. On the back of the page, an old photograph. It was Natalia, pregnant, smiling next to two men. One was Marcos, and the other, none other than the president of the Court of Justice at the time. KK froze. That didn't make sense. Overcome with distrust, he sought out the public defender who had accompanied him from the beginning. Together, they began a parallel investigation. They searched through old press archives, archived processes, medical records from the time of Natalia's pregnancy. And they found the first hole in the system. An anonymous complaint made by her 2 months before she died. He reported persecution, psychological pressure, and threats to not reveal the identity of the father. The document had been archived due to lack of evidence. However, the scariest thing was yet to come. In the second part of Natalia's diary, which until then seemed irrelevant, there were passages that, reread in this new light, took on a new meaning. He said that if I opened my mouth, it would ruin my life. But I won't shut up. My son deserves to know the truth, even if it costs me. KK began to wonder. What if the problem wasn't just Marcos's abandonment, but a larger conspiracy? Something inside him said, "Your mother died because she knew too much." With the support of an investigative journalist who followed her channel, KK prepared a dossier with all the documents, photos, and testimonies. A special hearing was scheduled, this time not to judge Marcos, but to reopen the investigation into Natalia's death. Marcos, upon learning this, collapsed emotionally. He never believed that Natalia had been a victim of anything other than fate. But now, faced with the documents, he had to admit, he may have just been a cog in a system that tried to hide an inconvenient truth. During the new hearing, the journalist revealed, live, excerpts from an anonymous audio that she received days before. The girl, Natalia, she was warned, but she didn't want to back down. They said she was destabilizing the reputation of important men. One day, they disappeared with her. They said it was an accident, but it wasn't. Marcos burst into tears in front of everyone. If this is true, I not only failed as a father, I was complicit, albeit without knowing it, in the silencing of those who trusted me most. He asked for the floor and said, "I don't want forgiveness, I want justice. For Natalia, for Keiki, for the truth." Keiki, still in shock, did not respond. He just stared at the place where his mother once sat in that same courtroom. The case was now in the hands of the National Justice Inspectorate and the federal police. But for Keiki, the biggest wound was something else. He had discovered who he was. He had gained a father, but in return, lost his peace. Even in the face of chaos, KK did not back down. It went until the end. He gave interviews, presented the documents, and he demanded that his mother's name be remembered not as a victim, but as heroine. A woman who died trying to guarantee her son the right to know who he was. But what no one expected was what would happen after that hearing. Something that would change everything. Once again. While the country followed the headlines about the KK case, and the court decided whether to officially reopen the investigation into Natalia's death, something even bigger was moving behind the scenes. An anonymous complaint reached the public ministry. It wasn't just about the past. It was about the present. In the envelope were confidential documents that linked 3 other high-ranking judges to a web of cover-ups similar to KK's case, including civil records fraud, destruction of medical files, and coercion of witnesses. An anonymous complaint reached the public ministry. It wasn't just about the past. It was about the present. In the envelope were confidential documents that linked 3 other high-ranking judges to a web of cover-ups similar to KK's case, including civil records fraud, destruction of medical files, and coercion of witnesses. KK, unintentionally, had opened a wound much deeper than I imagined. And the scariest thing? Among the names mentioned in the new dossier, there was Marcos Almeida himself. Yes, your father. The question that began to burn in KK's head, and in the hearts of everyone who followed the case, was just one. Did my father really not know anything? Or did he always know, and chose to lie until the end?
Suddenly, the hero of the turn could also be one of the villains. The public, who had previously been moved by the reunion between father and son, now found themselves divided. Some said, Marcos was just another victim of the system. Others shouted, he was there the whole time, and he shut up. This is unforgivable.
Journalists began to be threatened. One of the key witnesses has disappeared, and the journalist who helped Keiki suffered an attack that almost took her life. The case is no longer a family drama, and it became a national thriller with the ingredients of a judicial scandal, a network of omissions, purchased silences, and buried stories. All of Brazil stopped, waiting for the next reveal. Meanwhile, Keiki isolated himself. I didn't know who to trust anymore. If my father is lying, my whole life becomes a lie too. And then he makes an unexpected decision. Go confront Marcos, For the last time. But this confrontation will not be private. It will be live, on camera, so that the entire country hears the truth, or the final lie. Do you think you've seen it all? Do you think this story has already delivered its biggest twist? Get ready. Because what KK will discover in front of everyone, in front of cameras, journalists, and judges, it will turn an international case. A new name enters the scene, and a revelation buried 20 years ago will explode on national television. And then, yes, you will understand why KK was never just a rejected son. He was the key to a secret that many would do anything to bury forever. The date was set. A special broadcast on national television. An exclusive interview program would bring KK and Marcos together face to face, with the journalist who survived the attack leading the conversation. The hearing was historic. More than 50 million people watched. It was more than a family debate. It was an emotional trial before an entire country. The journalist opened firmly. Marcos, you had access to confidential documents. One of them was signed by you. A silent agreement. Do you confirm? Marcos turned pale. Silence. KK looked at him fixedly, as if holding his own soul in his fingers. Do you confirm or not, Marcos? With a trembling voice, he replied. Yes, I signed. The studio was completely silent. KK, without blinking, asked, Did you know my mother was going to die? No, I swear on everything, but when it happened I understood that they would carry out their threat. It was then that the journalist dropped the bomb. KK, you have a right to know. We did additional DNA testing, and we need to show you something. On the studio screen, the results of the new genetic test appeared. Marcos's name was not among the possible biological parents. Highlighted, a new name. Judge Augusto Resende, President of the Supreme Court at the time of KK's birth. The same man that Natalia denounced in the diaries. The revelation exploded like a hurricane. The most powerful man in justice in the early 2000s was, in fact, KK's biological father, and ordered the silencing of Natalia to maintain one's reputation. The case made international headlines. Brazil. Rejected son discovers that his father is a judge involved in a deadly conspiracy. CNN. Brazilian scandal shakes judicial core. Top judge may have ordered woman's death to protect secret child. El País. A buried truth. The story of KK and the corrupt justice of Brazil. KK now had a choice before him. Sue the state and file a lawsuit against the Resende family demanding billions in compensation. Create a national movement for emotional justice and historical memory, and give up money to turn your pain into a symbol. He chose the second option. I don't want fortune. I want justice and memory. I want a young person to never again have to fight so hard to find out who they are. I want my mother's name to be in every law book in this country. And I want everyone to know. We are not just victims. We are resistance. KK founded the Natalia Institute of Emotional Justice, offering legal, psychological, and identity support to thousands of young people. He gave lectures at universities, wrote a book. It became a streaming series. And his channel, which started with short cell phone videos, has become an international awareness platform. What about Marcos? He became a volunteer at the Institute. He was never called father again, but it was seen by KK as a man who made a mistake and chose to try to make it right. The last scene of the official documentary on the case shows KK visiting Natalia's grave. He kneels down, places a bouquet of yellow flowers and says, Mom, now I know who I am, and I promise, no one will ever silence our voices again. If you've made it this far, take a deep breath. Because this story isn't just about KK. It's about all of us seeking our truth, no matter how painful it may be. If this story touched you, leave your like, share with someone who needs to hear this. That's it, subscribe to the channel, because every week we bring real stories that touch the heart and conscience.